Podcast Talk.
Learn English naturally.
Sounding natural in English. Have you ever noticed that sometimes your English is technically correct, but it still doesn't sound natural? Like you say a sentence and people understand you, but it feels stiff, like you're reading from a textbook instead of actually talking. Today, we're talking about why that happens and what real natural English actually sounds like in everyday life. Because sounding natural isn't about using big words, it's about sounding relaxed, simple, and real.
Yeah, Emma, I see this all the time. People spend years studying grammar, memorizing rules, learning vocabulary lists. And then when they finally speak, they sound careful instead of comfortable. And the truth is, real conversations are messy. People pause, they repeat themselves, they change words halfway through a sentence. Natural speech isn't perfect. It's flexible. I remember when I first started working with international teams, the people who communicated best weren't the ones with perfect grammar. They were the ones who sounded relaxed and confident, even when they made small mistakes. And that's the key difference. When you focus too much on being correct, you lose the rhythm of real speech. But when you focus on communicating, your English starts to sound alive instead of rehearsed. So today we want to show what actually makes speech sound natural and why it's simpler than most learners think.
Exactly. And one of the biggest myths is that natural English means using complicated expressions or sounding advanced. But if you listen to real conversations, people use very simple words most of the time. They say things like, I me us, you know, kind of, pretty much. These small phrases make speech flow naturally. When learners avoid them because they think they sound too basic, their speech becomes rigid. Think about it like music. Grammar is the notes, but rhythm is what makes it sound good. Without rhythm, it feels robotic. I once had a student who knew thousands of words but sounded very formal in casual conversations. After we practiced using simple fillers and natural pauses, people suddenly started reacting to him differently. Conversations felt easier. So, sounding natural is less about knowledge and more about rhythm, tone, and comfort.
And comfort comes from practice, in real situations, not just studying alone. For example, when you talk with friends, you don't plan every sentence, you react. That spontaneity is what creates natural speech. Many learners try to translate everything in their head first, and that slows them down. The more you trust simple phrases and speak without overthinking, the more natural you sound. I always say clarity beats complexity. If your goal is connection instead of perfections, your speech becomes smoother. And honestly, most native speakers don't even notice small mistakes. They notice energy, tone, and confidence. So if you want to sound natural, stop trying to sound impressive. Start trying to sound comfortable.
Another thing that makes English sound natural is emotional tone. People don't just share information, they share feelings through how they speak. You can say the exact same sentence in different ways, and it will feel completely different depending on your tone. That's why listening is just as important as speaking practice. When you hear how people react, laugh, hesitate, or emphasize certain words, you start to understand the emotional rhythm of the language. I've noticed that learners who watch real conversations, not just lessons, pick this up much faster. They begin to mirror the natural flow without even realizing it, and suddenly their speech feels more human, more spontaneous. So instead of asking, is this sentence correct? Try asking, does this sound like something a real person would say? That question changes everything.
That's such a good point. Because natural speech isn't only about words, it's about reactions. Real conversations are full of small responses like, right, yeah, exactly, or I get what you mean. These little responses show engagement and make conversations feel alive. Yeah, without them, speech can sound flat, even if the grammar is perfect. When I worked in a busy office, I noticed how often people used these tiny reactions. They weren't thinking about them, it was automatic. For learners, practicing these small responses can instantly make conversations feel smoother. It creates a sense of connection instead of just exchanging information. And connection is what language is really for. Not perfection, connection.
Yes, and connection also comes from being willing to be imperfect. When you stop worrying about every small mistake, your personality starts to show through your speech. That's when people feel comfortable talking with you because natural conversations are never flawless. They're dynamic and human. I always tell learners to focus on being expressive instead of precise all the time. If you want to sound natural, allow yourself to pause, to think out loud, even to correct yourself. Those moments don't make you sound weak, they make you sound real. And once you accept that, speaking becomes much less stressful and much more enjoyable.
And enjoyment is actually a huge factor. When you enjoy speaking, your brain relaxes, and relaxed speech sounds more natural automatically. Think about the last time you talked about something you were passionate about. You probably didn't worry about grammar. You just spoke. That's the mindset we want learners to practice. Talk about things you care about, things that feel personal. That emotional engagement helps your speech flow naturally. Over time, your brain stops translating and starts responding directly. And that's when you know you're moving from learning English to living in English. It's a gradual shift, but it's a powerful one.
There's also something important about rhythm that many learners don't notice at first. Natural English has a kind of musical flow. Some words are stressed, others are softer, and sentences rise and fall in a way that feels almost like a melody. When speech has that rhythm, it sounds effortless. But when every word is pronounced with the same weight, it can sound robotic even if the pronunciation is correct. One way to practice this is to listen to real conversations and repeat short phrases, not just focusing on the words, but on the energy behind them. Notice where speakers slow down, where they speed up, and how they emphasize key ideas. Over time, your ear becomes more sensitive to this flow, and your own speech starts to mirror it naturally. It's less about technique and more about feeling the language.
I completely agree. And rhythm connects closely with confidence. When someone feels unsure, their speech often becomes slow and overly careful, which can interrupt that natural flow. Confidence doesn't mean speaking fast or perfectly. It means trusting that you can communicate even if you pause or search for a word. I remember when I was learning another language, I noticed that my conversations improved the moment I stopped trying to sound impressive and focused instead on being clear. Clarity creates comfort, and comfort creates natural speech. So sometimes the goal isn't to learn more vocabulary. It's to relax into the vocabulary you already know and use it more freely. That shift alone can make a huge difference.
Another helpful mindset is to think of conversations as cooperation instead of performance. You're not on stage trying to impress anyone. You're simply sharing ideas with another person. When learners stop seeing conversations as tests, their speech becomes lighter and more spontaneous. They listen more closely and respond more naturally because they're not busy judging themselves. I've seen this happen many times. The moment someone stops worrying about being perfect, they start sounding more authentic. Natural English isn't about sounding like a native speaker, it's about sounding comfortable being yourself in English. And that comfort grows every time you speak without overthinking.
That idea of comfort is so powerful because when people feel comfortable, they naturally become more expressive. They use gestures, varied tone, and more flexible language. And that's exactly what makes conversations feel alive. Think about talking with a close friend. You don't plan your sentences, you just react. That's the level of ease learners should aim for, even if it takes time to reach. Every conversation is practice, not a performance. And the more you treat it that way, the more natural your speech becomes. It's not about reaching some perfect level. It's about building a relationship with the language where speaking feels normal instead of stressful.
One of the most effective ways to sound natural in English is to start using simple, everyday phrases instead of trying to build complex sentences. Real conversations are full of short, natural expressions like, you know, I mean, and kind of, or to be honest. These phrases don't add information, but they make speech sound relaxed and human. For example, instead of saying, I did not enjoy the movie very much, you might say, I mean, it was okay, but I wouldn't watch it again. That sounds much more natural. Try listening to how people actually talk in podcasts or interviews and notice how often they use these small fillers. Then start adding one or two into your own speech. It's a simple change, but it instantly makes conversations feel more real.
Another great tip is to focus on speaking in chunks instead of translating word by word. Native speakers don't build sentences from grammar rules. They use phrases they've heard many times before. For example, instead of thinking about how to build a sentence, just learn natural chunks like at the end of the day, the thing is, or it depends. When you use chunks, your speech flows more smoothly because your brain doesn't need to calculate every word. When I was learning Spanish, I noticed that once I started memorizing phrases instead of individual words, my conversations became much faster and more relaxed. So try collecting phrases you hear often and practice using them in real situations.
Something else that makes a huge difference is learning to react naturally instead of giving full formal answers. In real life, people rarely respond with long explanations unless they need to. If someone asks how your day was, a natural answer might be, pretty good actually, or kind of busy, but not bad. Short reactions make conversations feel easy and comfortable. You can practice this by imagining simple daily questions and answering them out loud in a relaxed way. The goal is not to sound impressive, it's to sound real. And real speech is usually simple, emotional, and spontaneous.
And here's a tip that many learners overlook: record yourself speaking. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but it's one of the fastest ways to improve. When you listen back, you can notice if your speech sounds too slow, too formal, or unnatural. Then you can adjust little by little. I used to do this when preparing presentations, And it helped me sound more relaxed because I became aware of my speaking habits. You don't need to sound perfect, just aim to sound a little more natural each time. Small improvements add up quickly. Over time, you'll hear the difference, and so will other people.
Another powerful way to sound natural in English is to start noticing how people simplify their thoughts when they speak. In real life, people don't speak in perfectly structured sentences, they think while they talk. So instead of trying to sound polished, allow your speech to be a little messy. For example, you might start a sentence, pause, and then rephrase it. That's completely normal and actually makes you sound more authentic. I remember talking to a friend who was learning English, and she was always trying to say everything perfectly. But once she started allowing herself to pause and say things like, let me think, or how do I explain this? Her conversations became much smoother. Those small moments show confidence, not weakness. They show that you're engaged in the conversation instead of performing. So give yourself permission to think out loud. It makes your speech feel natural and relaxed.
That reminds me of something I noticed when working with international teams. The people who sounded the most natural weren't always the most fluent. They were the most relaxed. They laughed while they couldn't find a word. They explained things differently and they didn't panic when they made small mistakes. One colleague used to say how, wait, that's not the word I want, and then continue speaking. And honestly, everyone understood him perfectly because communication is about clarity, not perfection. When you stop trying to control every sentence, you create space for your personality to come through. And personality is what makes speech memorable and engaging. So instead of asking yourself, is this correct? Try asking, is this clear? That small shift changes the entire way you communicate.
Let's also talk about listening habits, because sounding natural starts with hearing natural speech regularly. If you only listen to textbook English, your brain learns a very formal style that doesn't match real conversations. Try listening to interviews, casual podcasts, or conversations where people interrupt each other slightly, laugh, or change topics naturally. That's how real communication sounds. When you expose yourself to that style often, your brain starts copying the patterns automatically. I always recommend choosing one podcast you enjoy and listening to it consistently. Over time, you'll notice that certain phrases and rhythms start appearing in your own speech without effort. Consistency is more powerful than intensity when it comes to sounding natural.
And maybe the most important advice is to stop comparing yourself to native speakers all the time. Your goal isn't to sound like someone else. It's to sound comfortable being yourself in English. Every speaker has a unique rhythm, tone, and way of expressing ideas. And that individuality is what makes conversations interesting. I've met people from all over the world who speak English differently, and that diversity makes communication richer, not worse. So focus on being clear, expressive, and relaxed. Those qualities matter much more than sounding perfectly native. When you accept your own voice, speaking becomes easier, more enjoyable, and much more natural.
So, if there's one thing to remember from this conversation, it's that sounding natural in English isn't about learning more rules. It's about changing how you think about speaking. When you stop trying to be perfect and start focusing on connection, everything begins to feel easier. Conversations become lighter, mistakes feel less scary, and your confidence grows naturally over time. Every small conversation you have is progress, even if it feels imperfect in the moment. Because real growth happens through experience, not through waiting until you feel ready. And the more you speak, the more your brain adapts, your reactions become faster, and your voice starts to sound more relaxed and genuine. So trust the process, keep showing up, and allow yourself to enjoy the journey of becoming more comfortable in English.
And if this episode helped you see English in a more relaxed and realistic way, we'd love for you to keep learning with us. Conversations like this are here to remind you that progress doesn't come from pressure. It comes from practice and patience. If you enjoy these real, honest discussions about language and communication, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future episodes. And we'd really love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments what topic you'd like us to talk about next, or what part of learning English feels most challenging right now. Thank you so much for listening and spending this time with us. Keep speaking, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next episode.